Were you just the one that knocked on my door?
I think Joe must have knocked
Oh,
on my door,
okay.
because I just passed him going to the bathroom and he said, hey, if you see Eric, can you ask him to pull out the big whiteboard?
Oh.
Hello.
Hmm? You know?
Yes.
On my right here.
Let's turn it this way.
Okay.
Because this is the side that more.
Use the other side.
Cool.
So you can just feel free to erase all of that.
All right. You have, here, let me grab my iPad. Do you have an eraser? hanging?
Yeah, oh, there's one right here.
Perfect, thanks.
And then. That was for the summit. That was for the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I just
no.
saw my name and I was like, what does it say about me?
Your name was on here?
Is that me?
Oh, the other. There's a different Eddie that spoke at the.
Oh,
at the
okay.
event.
It's like, what did I do? What did I do?
Some feedback about it. I suppose it was like the same as your last one. Is it? Working with weather? No, because it has the same, it has nesting in it. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. That's what Adrian
I mean,
said.
it says working with flippers and investors.
I don't. That's what
Okay.
Adrian told me. He was like, "Is this the same?" I know. I was like, he was like.
Wait, what are we doing now?
Is it already for a class like this? And I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, we haven't done this one yet.
Yeah, so I don't know.
I don't like it.
What was it? What are you hearing?
Are
we switching?
A question on whether this is the same class that we've taught before. Which, first of all, there's nothing wrong with the same class coming back again, and second,
I highly doubt it because we're making it.
Right. This is the first time we're doing it.
We are figuring out what people want to learn about. Okay, so the mock is back there. I don't even know if we're gonna need this.
Maybe not. Oh, are we on TV too?
I don't know.
I'm recording.
Oh, really? Do we want to be on the portal on this one?
Are we gonna say anything that shouldn't be recorded?
Okay, I can stop it.
I'll let you know.
Oh yeah, I guess we don't have to use it.
Oh, that's true. We don't have to upload it, right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, let's
Okay,
see how we
let's
do
go ahead and
because
record
we're
It is later to come and ask
Yeah.
me.
Okay.
yeah, because we're gonna. This is gonna be pretty conversational. So if we're like, it wasn't that great, let's not use
so
it.
I
Sure.
will-
Well,
what do you-
so
what
we'll
do you
record
want?
it and then we'll decide. Does that sound good? Yeah.
Okay.
Sweet.
So I will make it unpublished. Okay.
Yeah.
I
Thank
was
you.
like trying to think of like who you were referring to.
Where'd you get that water? Is that water from the kitchen?
Yeah.
Curious
Figure I need to hydrate a little.
Okay.
I haven't hydrated in weeks.
Okay, I'm just wondering, 'cause I know you want to get started with learning stuff soon.
Yeah, yeah, no, for
It's
sure.
but
And,
it's blinking.
Hi, Blinky.
Really sweet.
Yeah, we're
Sure, why? It's the picture quality is not good. But even moving it, it's not working. It's like zooming. I think we need to change the batteries also. Because that TV remote is also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's why last year meeting, the screen was blank. Johnny mentioned later, so I'm like, I have done the same thing.
People are still on the YouTube?
Okay.
Oh,
We need to get them in the office.
345.
I know we've had that conversation.
Ah.
Yeah,
See, I think the camera is 344. That's why it's blinking, so the remote's
Yeah,
working.
we're gonna meet, he's gonna go over like how he does his office.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
cool. And, yeah, I don't know. Have you take those?
Yeah, Danny is the one that you want to reach
Okay.
out to.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I introduced you guys on that.
Yes.
So just, I'm pretty sure she replied, so just click on her calendar.
15 times at least you did. Not a single time.
Okay.
I did 10 times.
Yeah,
but I just want you to know.
I just got a phone call from
So you
the
wanna
other
put
guy.
it in the.
Yeah.
The other guy.
No,
Let's see what I got.
turn off on if the settings.
Couldn't remember his name.
Turn off the complete setting.
All right, is it time-ish?
It's time-ish.
Time-ish.
Whatever that
oh,
means.
It's time on the button. Cool.
So,
Well, let's start and figure out what we want to talk about.
so let's start by saying that, you know, we decided to do this because Anda had reached out, interested in working with investor flippers and just kind of wanting like a little bit of an overview. So really, you know, a lot of this comes out of a request to just kind of talk about the general workings of working with an investor flipper. So we're gonna hopefully keep this a little bit conversational too, so jump right in. I have some documents that kind of relate to the process, and we're gonna also talk about some considerations when you're helping search for properties for an investor.
If you want.
If you want,
Yeah.
does that sound good?
Okay,
All right.
cool.
All right.
Yeah, and that's where I'd like to start out, is
Okay.
like figure out what the pain points are and
Yep.
what you guys want to make sure we cover. Because I mean, Eddie and I can talk. We could talk for 6 hours on all the different aspects, but we only have an hour and a little.
Sometimes Joe and I actually find ourselves on the phone in the afternoon to talk about one issue, and we talk about real estate for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So like we,
Yeah. Like
as,
yesterday.
I know it sounds awful and really, so don't let us do that. So,
So, what do you want to make sure we cover?
That's a great question. I guess you don't know what to ask, you know?
so let me ask you,
Yeah.
let me start with a question then. Have any of you been at that open house where you have that kind of like, kind of, how do I put this nicely? That kind of really confident, know-it-all-y person comes through, and they walk through quickly, and they start talking to you about, well, you know, I might be working with you if you have something for me, but I've also got these other people, and this is what I do, and then they kind of talk to you about how they do this all the time, and that they
Yes.
invest. You've had that guy, right? We've all had that guy. So I think like part of for me, part of what we should be discussing is how we evaluate the relationships we make. What do you think about that, Joe? Because everybody that's in real estate has been new in real estate at one point. And I've been new in real estate before in my life. And when I was new in real estate, I was looking for opportunities
All
wherever
the
I could
deals.
find them. All the deals.
Yes.
And I needed to, right? Because I was running up credit card bills. Anybody do that, right? Just in order to be in real estate. So for me, I think like as I became more seasoned, I started to realize that I needed, for the sake of my sanity and my own time, to kind of get a sense of who it is that's proposing working with me. So let's go back to that open house and talk about that for a second, shall we? Did some of the questions, you were nodding a lot on it, did some of the questions about like talking about real estate investors and how to work with them, does it come from just kind of like that kind of experience? Somebody saying, I want to work with you?
Exactly, and that kind of attitude where I felt that I'm not gonna be in control, and they're not gonna. I'm not gonna be seen as an expert in the field. They will know everything, and I follow their lead. And also, like you said, if you help me, fine. If not, I'm gonna find another realtor, and I'm gonna pay him nothing.
Okay, so I'm glad we're going right there, because this is the stuff that obviously concerns me, right? The idea that, you know, that person, and I've been there myself, that's so confident and knows what, you know, purportedly knows what they're doing, and they want to run the show, and they are going to tell you what they need, when they need it, and if they're going to work with you when it happens. I've had situations even recently where a newer agent had a started working with an investor who was doing things like generating assignment forms, which I'll show you later, themselves, right? They had some real estate experience and they started generating forms themselves. And they just had her as this conduit, and I found out about it, and that's really problematic, right? Because we're licensed by the state of California and we're responsible to the client and we're responsible to the duties that we, you know, say that we're going to take when we're getting that license. And so we're back at the open house. Joe, what do you want to know about the person that that introduces themselves to you in order to vet them?
Right. Well, it starts with the same thought process with any client that walks in the door.
Mhm.
Are you ready, willing, and able to start with? Do they? And on the investment side, it gets much deeper than that. It's because of this know-it-all syndrome that we tend to run into. Can I call it that?
Yeah,
Know-it-all
I
syndrome? Okay.
hope we do, because I think that's what I've run into. I mean,
So beyond what you would do for a normal buyer, just like basic vetting of who you are, do our values align, do we want to work together, it's going to be things like, do they actually know what they're talking about? And do we need to have an educational conversation? Because there are first-time investors out there too that also have a know-it-all syndrome. They want to
Yeah.
present themselves as if they've already done this a bazillion times, even if they haven't put a deal together.
and I've also met people who've done things a bazillion times and done it wrong a bazillion times.
Yeah.
Where there's drama and headaches and problems all through the one. I've met real estate agents who've been real estate agents for 30 years who do deals in a less than orthodox way,
Yeah.
and manage to make it through. And there are investors out there certainly who will tell you, I've sold a lot of properties, or I've invested in a lot of properties, I've done this a lot. Doesn't necessarily mean that they really know what they're doing.
Right.
So I love your point about what are you doing with a regular everyday buyer, because
Yeah.
I think it really is hugely important to this conversation. Are you all, when you're meeting a buyer of residential real estate at open house, are you, when they come in and they say, I want to do this my way, and you say to them, do you have the funds, do you have the financing figured out, and they say to you, we'll get that figured out, or I'll get that figured out, do you proceed and say, okie dokie, following you right along, or do you stop and have a consultation with them? I mean, I hope you're stopping and having consultation with them, right?
Yeah,
right?
I think I would back up a step. When I'm meeting people for the first time about their real estate journey, the first thing I want to know is their motivation. Like, why are they doing this? And that helps set the context for, in my view, for working with them in a holistic manner. Out of that comes their goals and how they want to operate. And if what they want is even in alignment with the market. I've had plenty of investors that want to invest in buy and hold real estate, so rentals, and they want 10% cash on cash returns or whatever, and things that just are not realistic in this market. And so that's part of it too, is what you want realistic. Just like a buyer that's like, yeah, I want a 4-bed, 3-bath house in the hills and I've got a $500,000 budget. Like, what do? We educate, and then we may choose
I was
to
making
not
up a
work
word.
with that person. You want purple?
Realistic question mark. Realistical?
Realistical.
I think this is actually the place to start. Where we start with all clients, right? Assessing motivation, assessing actual ability, and assessing doing a reality check.
Yeah.
The
But
reality.
But then how do we know if it's realistic? If someone says that they want to do a flip and profit $200,000, is that realistic? Do we have enough data to go off of?
Can I back us up then?
Sure.
So I had said that what do you do when you're meeting like a young family that wants to buy a house and they've got all these ideas at an open house? You say, let's set a consultation appointment. I think the same thing needs to happen. I think in the open house, or when you're getting the cold call, or when you're having that phone call that, or somebody's putting you in touch with somebody, the first thing to say is, to try to assess a little bit of motivation on the phone or in that early appointment, and to say, wow, this is great. I'd love to talk to you more about this. I need to do a little research on your behalf. Let's meet in my office on, May 22nd at 2 p.m. You need to give yourself some room to actually look up the data
That was yesterday.
Oh, well, I'm late. And what kind of data are you looking at?
Yeah, and what are you looking at? Yeah. Well, and that's why having some idea of what they're looking for is important. So what type of investors are there in our markets?
Flippers?
Flippers? Yep.
Now connected to Dell 16 Plus.
All right.
Buy and hold.
Buy and hold, yes. Yep.
Passive.
Passive investors, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Might be short-term rental investors. And then we'll talk later about wholesalers. Wholesalers, yes.
Can we not? No.
No, we have to.
No,
we
no,
have to
we
talk
really
about
have
it.
to.
Is that? It's with that W,
It's a
right?
W.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wholesalers. Okay. Boo. Just kidding. It's not all terrible.
The investors love the wholesalers.
Investors love wholesalers?
Uh-huh.
Sure, if they can bring them good deals.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what. So back to the motivation. What do investors want? They want the deals.
Here, give me your pen.
And preferably off-market is what I mostly get.
Why?
Because it's a deal and it's,
'Cause
no
they-
one knows about it yet.
Yes. It's the same. I mean, our end buyers want it too. This exclusivity, this like magical thing that no one else has seen. On market can mean low ball offers too, and maybe we should talk about low ball offers.
I actually think this is a great place for, this is a great, this is so great that we get to have this discussion, because I think that that's the person that you meet at that, and oftentimes the person that you meet on that open house, at that open house too, at least that I've met,
Yeah.
right? They believe that somehow you've got some hidden inventory that you can offer. So assessing how realistic somebody is huge, right? I hate wasting my time in real estate. I hate driving people around or having a 6-month a relationship with somebody who never intended to do anything. They didn't know that they never intended to do anything, but they never intended to do anything. So that lowball offers kind of gets us back to assessing motivation and how realistic they are.
Yeah.
Other kinds of investors.
Unrealistic returns.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's kind of back to this combination of motivation and realistic. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that they can be unrealistic in any of those categories: the short term, the passive, the buy and hold, the flipper, the wholesaler. Yeah. I think that covers kind of the big buckets.
Yeah, so now we've had that conversation that probably has happened initially, not at our consultation, that prep conversation that happened on the fly in the open house or on a phone call. We've tried to assess who they are, and we want to know what kind of investor they are, what kind of investment they're looking for, because we're going to need to go back to our computers.
Let's role play that real quick though, just so we're clear on what that conversation could look like. Do you want to be an investor?
Do I want to be an investor? Sure.
Or does someone else want to play
Yeah,
the role
have
of
somebody
an
else
investor?
do it so that I can watch and tell you what I think.
Do you want to be an investor? All you have to do is answer my question.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I wanted to be an architect, but I'll be an investor.
Fine. Well, thanks for coming into the open house today. Yeah, so you mentioned that you're an investor, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me like what you're looking for, what your goals are?
Looking for any home that's a good flip opportunity. The ARV, which is after fair value, should be, I'm looking for 70% of the ARV. So if.
What do you mean by 70%?
So basically, if after fair value is $1 million, I'm looking to buy that property for 70% or less.
Okay. Okay. Great. That's a very clear buy box. I appreciate that to help define exactly what you're looking for. And so you've had experience in flipping?
Yes.
How many have you done at this point?
I do about 10 to 15 every year, and I've been doing that for the last 10 years.
Okay. Why do I ask that question?
To see if they're actually experiencing what they're talking about.
Yeah. Do they know?
Who knows more, you or me, right?
Yeah, so you get track record, and he's got experience now. So I have some sense that he's done this a few times, and that kind of changes the educational approach that I might take. I don't have to hopefully educate him on the realities of our market. He knows. He's done 15 of them in the last year. Oh, that's great. Okay, so when you tell me that you're looking to purchase something at 70% of the after repair value, is there a price range that you're looking for?
No, actually, yeah, don't wanna touch anything, that's over $2 million, but, comfortable range is anywhere from 800,000 to 1.5.
Okay, why is that? Why not over 2 million?
I don't know, I wanna be able to cater to the most buyers in the market that are looking for 3-2 bath and within the Bay Area, depending upon which city you are in.
So, okay, so it sounds like you're looking for a quick sale when you're
Yes.
finished.
Yes.
Okay, great. And can you tell me a little bit about the types of projects that you do? Or is it like lipstick on a pig, or are you doing full renovations?
No, primarily, single family.
Okay.
And, 70% or 30% discount is the minimum standard that we look for.
Okay.
It could be better than that, but, it would have to be at least 70% of the.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I guess I'm curious, so back to my question though, I'm sorry. Are you tend to lean towards light renovations?
Are you doing
or-
structural or are you doing?
or bigger projects?
Not so many structurals, because then that takes a long time.
Yeah.
With the permits and stuff.
Mhm.
But as long as, we're not moving a lot around.
Okay.
I think we have done some structural changes, but they're probably 10 to 15% of the projects that we
Okay.
do.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So tend to be smaller projects,
Yes.
mostly cosmetic
Yes.
rehabs. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Great. Why is that important?
Know what you're looking for.
Know what you're looking for. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because some flippers or investors or whatever we want to call them will just shy away from bigger projects. They want to be in and out in a handful of months, and that's a question I could ask. Like, what's your typical hold time? Meaning, from the moment you buy it and close on it till the moment you sell it. Are you looking for a 3-month hold? Are you looking for up to a 12-month hold where you can do a lot to the property? Do you have an answer for that?
Ideally, a month.
A month, okay.
We are basically
So it's quick
in and
projects.
out,
Yeah.
within a month.
Okay.
Then after that, the listing and all that can take based on the market conditions, but
Yep.
our project is usually a month.
Okay, so about a month of work. Okay.
Yes.
So when you see things that need structural or lots of permitting that you just know is going to have to happen, probably
It's not
not the
gonna
right
happen in
project
that
for
time.
him. Yeah, yeah.
So, when we're done here, I'd like to be a different kind of investor.
Oh, cool. Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
I guess my last question is around, like, do you typically pull permits for your projects?
Technically, the cities require if you're making a major change, but we're kind of under the radar where we are replacing the like-minded, similar.
So you're generally staying out of projects that
Yes.
require permits?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. That's great.
That's why.
That was a good answer,
We're only
too.
there for a month.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll hear from investors that they don't permit things, even when they need permits. These cosmetic projects that Preet's talking about might not need permits. We're not meant to be the experts there besides asking and disclosing what we know. But when you hear things like, if Preet were to say, yeah, usually my projects are full renovations and we're tearing, moving walls around and stuff, and then I ask him if he gets permits and he says no, that's a giant red flag. That's something that we would need to approach very cautiously. And why is that?
Because we need to disclose.
Yeah, in short, yeah. And that's how, that's the conversation that I often have. Like, well, if you work with me, I'm gonna be disclosing that. Is that a problem? Yeah, okay.
For sure. Yeah, it's not worth your risk. We have a clear obligation, or sellers have a clear obligation under the law to disclose any material facts.
Yeah.
But it's also not worth it for you. It really
Yeah.
isn't, to be involved in some kind of litigation later.
Yep. Oh, it's still the bathroom key.
Whoops. I would like you to ask me what I want
Yes.
to do.
What do you want to do, Eddie?
I don't know. My father-in-law just died, and he left me $50,000, and my wife and I were just trying to think of something to do with that money, and
Okay.
we want to kind of get some income out of it. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that important to turn that money into income?
I just heard it's a really good place to park your money and make some money, real estate investment.
Okay. Well, tell me about your goals with the money. Like, what is the outcome you're looking for?
Just some kind of return on it. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to say that there are two different kinds
Yeah,
of
yeah.
people who are going to approach you about investing in real estate, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's going to be somebody where you have to do all of the driving.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
And because is knowledgeable and did come prepared. But I just wanted to get that out there, right?
Yeah.
That this is a kind of investor, but it's not everybody we're going to be running into.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's continuing that conversation, though, that's an educational conversation.
Mhm.
This is a fact-finding mission to understand motivation and if we're
Mhm.
the right fit together. This one is how can I help you understand what you're actually looking for, just like
Yep.
we do with our buyers,
That's right.
generally. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What I do know, and what I'll tell you that they'll tell you is I know that I don't want to do anything.
Yeah, so
Like
you're-
I don't, like that same person is going to tell you that they want to be passive. I think,
Yeah.
usually.
Okay. Yeah, and you can find that out pretty easily. Like,
Mhm.
have you thought about like flipping a house? Is that something you're interested in?
I don't know. That sounds like a lot of work.
Cool. So you're probably looking for something a little bit lower effort.
Yeah, I
So
I
maybe
just
a-
hear that there's a lot of available
Okay.
doors in Oakland that I should probably, get myself something other than the home I live in.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'll
Right
get
now.
you some resources on what's for like a buy and hold investment, what they typically can look like. And we'll need to talk about the risks and the rewards, because there's both.
Mhm.
There's a lot of them, especially in California, and see if it's in alignment with what you're looking for.
Okay.
Have you been a landlord before?
Nope.
Okay. Do you have any idea what it entails?
No, and I really don't want 2 a.m. calls or anything like
Okay.
that. I just want somebody else to deal with it. I just want to make some money off of my money.
Okay, okay.
Have you heard stock market?
But I think that we're going to go back to the office, right, with
Yeah.
both of these two conversations.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back to the office. Let's go back to the office. So we've developed everything's developing a relationship, right? When we're out and we're in an open house and we're meeting just a buyer who was buying for their own family. The first step is to kind of build some trust and make a relationship so that there's a second date, right? I think
Mhm.
that's the way I look at it.
If you want one. Yeah.
So, Joe did a great job of asking the kinds of questions that a savvy investor is, already thinking about, right? You kind of hit on the points that he's already thinking about. And then Joe kind of made me, as the less knowledgeable investor, feel like I was in good hands. Like, this guy sounds like somebody who's going to be able to kind of walk me through it, right? So then we've set an appointment and we're meeting with them now, right? Non-savvy guy over here, let's say. So Joe, I'd like to know what your first step is if you know that you've got an appointment tomorrow.
Yeah.
For this guy.
For that guy.
The non-savvy one?
For the
We're talking about
savvy
savvy
guy.
first?
Let's go to savvy.
Yeah, so if I don't have all this information, because like sometimes at an open house or on the phone you can get some of it, sometimes you can't. So fill in the gaps, and some of the gaps that we haven't talked about is where's the money coming from? Like, are you working with co-investors? Do you have access to hard money? What's that financial situation look like? And the answer they're probably going to give is, oh, I'm a cash buyer. Like, okay, where's the cash coming from? That's an important follow-up. And then you might learn very quickly that they're not a cash buyer. They're a hard money buyer. Oh, but it's as good as cash.
Mhm.
Like, well, it's mostly as good as cash. And, there are things that we need to look out for. Most hard money lenders are still going to do some form of appraisal on the property because it's ultimately their money at risk. And they often require down payment. So where's that money coming from? We need to know all those things, again, at some point. Yeah.
What are the current rates for hard money loans?
Last I talked to somebody, it was like 10, 11, somewhere in that range.
That seems
And-
pretty
and-
standard, right?
And some points as well.
And usually a lot of upfront points, yeah, or back end. Yeah.
Upfront cost, you said?
Yeah, like they'll
Points.
charge 2 or 2.5% of the loan amount.
Plus the interest rate.
Right, plus the interest rate. Yep. Either upfront or on the back end, or because these are short-term loans, that it has to make sense for the investor. Like, if I'm going to lend $100,000, for example, at 10% interest for a year, that's 10 grand, but for a month, it's $1,000. So do I really want to put my 100,000 at risk for a flip for a $1,000 return? And that's where these points come in. Like, well, I'm going to charge 3%, on top of 10% interest, on top of whatever else seems to make sense to protect my investment and make the risk worth the reward. And your track record is important to me too. Yeah. I forgot where that question came from, but it's a good one. Oh, interest rates, that's right. So at the appointments, well, so this person's gonna be challenging to get an appointment with, if I'm gonna be totally frank and honest.
Yeah, they're always moving through rooms the way they move through that open house, and they don't want to commit to you.
Yeah.
Going back here, was cold calling maybe 6-7 months ago, and I came across someone who said, oh, they're aggressively looking to buy an investment property, and then we chatted for a while, and then we had a meeting at the office, the conference room, and she sounded as if she was a very savvy investor. Maybe she had gotten the secondhand information from somebody else, but number one, we required the representation agreement, and second, when we asked for the pre-approval or the proof of funds, we never got anything from her. So, I mean, after a week or 2 weeks of follow-ups, we just left them alone because we were not able to get any proof of funds or any pre-approval for anyone.
Yeah, that's that whole vetting
Yeah.
thing, right? Like, and sometimes it takes longer to
Yeah.
find out that you're
Yeah.
wasting your time but we go down that road all the time in real estate, we have to, right? To a point.
Yeah. So how do you get in front of this? Like, some of us want to work with this buyer and can be successful. I've probably closed a dozen or so deals with this type of buyer.
Can I make a point about the not
Oh,
getting
sure.
an appointment thing?
Yeah.
The point I want to make is, it doesn't change what you're doing next. So you said you might not be able to get them to sit down, but whether you got an appointment to sit down with them or not, it's time to do some homework, is the point, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And what do they want to see? They want deals. Yes, that's all they want. They don't want anything else usually. Sometimes they'll want connections with your money lender or whatever. Yeah.
You could just take their number or email them, and just every time you want a deal, you send it to them right away. And after a while, they'll call you.
That's-
Like, let's have one.
Yeah, that's a strategy as well. Yes, chances are you're not getting them in your office, but where could you get them as a captive audience member?
At a property.
At a property, yeah, at a showing. And it might be as simple as, hey, have you seen the dump over on whatever street?
That's a good one.
Yeah, like why don't we meet there tomorrow at 2 or whatever? And obviously do your due diligence to make sure you're not gonna get murdered or anything.
Because I think almost everyone is getting at least
So wait, Joe,
1 or 2 calls.
don't get murdered, right?
Don't get
All right.
murdered.
Everybody write that down? Don't get murdered.
Write it down.
So, do you share like opportunities with investors that you don't have a buyer's agreement with? It's like, here you go, and then they go to the sellers.
So that's where things get pretty hairy, and that's where these conversations are of vital importance. And so you can ask, like, well, how do you typically work? Like, who are you working with to buy these deals? And they'll tell you, like, oh, I'm often, getting calls direct from sellers or whatever. Or I work with a handful of agents in the area. Either one of those is a likely outcome. What else might they say? Chances are they're not going to say, I work exclusively with one agent on every single deal forever.
So the reality, the technical reality, is that now until August 17th, what you propose is a possibility that you could work with somebody without a representation agreement. But after August 17th, you're going to at least need to get the non-exclusive agreement signed with anybody. So you'll have to talk to the investor about signing a non-exclusive agreement.
Yeah. So let's say Preet is one who says, yeah, I work with a handful of agents in the area. Generally, whoever brings me the deal, that's who I'm closing it with. Like, okay, so where does that conversation go next? So that I can, do both of these things at the same time. Protect my commission and evaluate our relationship. Yeah.
Question. So, I was just thinking that we did a couple of projects last year, and I don't know, they were kind of fixer-uppers, but for the seller side, we represented the seller. And so now I get calls almost every day, or I'm sure everybody does that, right? And they're asking, oh, do you have a fixer-upper? And I've been saying, oh, sorry, I don't. Maybe I will in 3 months.
Yep.
But I was thinking that now,
Speak nice and loud over the
Yeah.
vacuum.
Yeah, and I was thinking that maybe, like, everybody knows from the office,
Yeah.
our office listings and all that, if there is a fixer-upper.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a listing.
Yep.
Could be from our office
Yep.
or another office. What would be your leverage to show that? Or maybe they just have those telemarketers and they're calling you,
Yeah.
right? And you tell them, hey, you know what, I do have a property, but I don't wanna say it's not my listing.
Right.
I could say yes, we do have few properties from our office.
Yeah.
Uh,
Our listing.
Yeah, our listings.
Yeah.
What's your leverage to
Yeah.
basically?
You're getting to my point, though, is when someone says, yeah, I work with a handful of agents in the area, like, okay, great, you have the opportunity to tell them how you work and what you expect. Like, great, I work with investors and here's how I do it. When I am showing you a property, I expect that we sign a non-exclusive representation agreement so that my commission can be protected. Because I want to know if I'm spending time getting deals in front of you or showing you property, that if you choose to buy them, I get paid.
You run way more of a risk, actually, with somebody who's shopping around with a whole bunch of people.
How would you do that representation agreement when you haven't even shown the property?
Yeah, it's non-exclusive. So it's like, look, I'm going to show you a property. We're going to meet at a property.
But they may be working with so many different other
Yeah,
agents.
that's okay. Like, it could be as simple as like, hey, have you seen the property on Main Street or whatever? Maybe it's off market, maybe it's our office listing. Like, no, like, cool, it's a 2-bedroom house that needs some fixing. Would you be interested in going to see it? Here's its current value, here's its ARV, or whatever you know about it.
So what if you don't share
there
it?
is
Let me get there.
mechanism.
Yeah, yeah. And
I can
let me-
tell you, he's asking how if it's not on the form. There's another
There is.
document called a broker involvement form.
Oh, yeah.
So you can actually memorialize the fact that you had involvement in that.
You're saying if you don't have a
I
house
was
to show
just
them?
thinking that, no, let's say I know we have
Yeah.
these many homes that are
Right.
fixer-uppers,
Yep.
whatever.
Mhm.
But I don't wanna give them any details before I have something in written that I'm gonna get paid. when
So
they
you do the
it.
non-exclusive-
I don't want him to get the address from me and talk to Joe
So
and say,
let-
you know what, Joe,
so I'm
somebody
ans-
told
so
me
I'm
there's a property,
answering-
can you do it?
Let Eddie answer
So
your
I'm
question.
answering that question. You can write a non-exclusive agreement without putting the property address down on the agreement, but you have to follow up with it after you've shown them the property to prove that I was the involved broker that showed you this property. So
Can-
you can wait. You don't have to do it. You don't have to, like, in advance on a buyer rep agreement, non-exclusive buyer rep agreement, say, I'm taking credit for 123 Main Street. You can get them to sign the non-exclusive agreement, bring them to 123 Main Street, and then have them sign the notice of broker
And they can
involvement
have those
form.
as signed with as many people as they want.
They could, but we'd still have an argument to be made that we were the procuring costs. So the reality with any kinds of these protections that we talk about, commission protections, is that they're only as good as the fight that we're willing to put up later, right? And how good our case is. So
Yeah.
it adds a layer of protection, but if they were to sign 3 or 4 of this, we'd have to pursue them, and pursue them into arbitration or court or whatever, but.
Also, you should have like a text message or emails.
Yeah, right, that's absolutely include those in your file. So just to rehash the order of things, sign the non-exclusive agreement. Like, great, I'm gonna get a property in front of you this afternoon, here's what I expect. That's of properties I show you, that I'm gonna be your agent on those properties. Is that fair? Yes, that's fair. Cool. So I'm gonna send you the buyer representation agreement. It's non-exclusive, so you can continue all your other relationships, that's fine. Once it's signed, I'll text message you the address and meet you there at 2 o'clock. And then you screenshot it, put it in your file with the non-exclusive representation form, and you've got some protections.
And to Abu, right? To Abu's point, we need to document. We need to document our participation, the broker involvement. There is the CAR form to do it. It's the best document to use if we ever had to found ourselves in front of an arbitration group. But everything we can do to document that we were setting the appointment through texts, pulling a disclosure package, whatever it is going to help that case. But the non-exclusive agreement itself doesn't have to have the address on it at the time we go show the property.
But you're saying to follow up after with the address?
I would, yeah,
Okay.
or
Oh,
at
yeah.
very least, have a paper trail, like the one that Abu was talking about, where
Yeah.
you're obviously the one letting them through the door.
Yeah, and it could be an email too, like, great meeting you at this property address. It's very clear, which is, just goes towards your argument, should there be a claim on that commission. Okay, so that's probably the most probable, like, hey, I work with lots of agents, spell out how you expect to work and operate, get the non-exclusive signed, and move forward. And you might turn out, you might learn pretty quickly that it's not a relationship you want to continue. Maybe you do that, and the guy still goes and tries to buy the house direct from the listing agent or whatever it is. And then right? You know that that's not your buyer, and you don't want to work with that person. The reality, so the investors typically have one thing in mind, which is to further whatever their goals are. Buying more houses, flipping, whatever it is, which for most people involves keeping a positive reputation in our market, which means that they're going to respect these things that we're laying out and the standards that we expect in the buyer rep agreements.
Having
And
said that.
Having said that, there's another group of people that may not follow through with those, with what you put in place.
There's going to be some inherent,
Yeah.
I don't know if risk is the right word, but in terms of your business practice, choosing to work with investors is going to have the inherent possibility of wasting a little bit more of your time than working with Bob and Cindy who come in and sit with you and they're buying their house at 123 Main Street. Because the investor is savvy and they're looking at their bottom line and they just need you to produce or not produce, and they're not as emotionally connected to you. And so it's just a reality we have to live with if that's the choice that we're going to make, to invest time in working with investors. I think, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to decide when we've wasted enough time with each investor.
I think both of you are very right, actually. But one thing I've learned about investors, I've worked many deals with, the people at the end of the day, everyone wants to make money.
Yeah.
And as long as we all clear about this, they want to make some money, we want to make some money, we have a commission to make. What I've seen with investors, I find it working with investors easy, actually, because I find them very ethical.
Yeah.
The ones I've dealt with, and those who are you know from get-go, like this is not
Yeah.
the guy I've worked
Yeah.
with. He makes an appointment, then he talks to the buyer, and why am I involved in that?
Well, it takes a little time. For people who haven't worked with them for 10 years like you have, it takes a little time to
Sure.
trust your instincts on that.
Yeah,
So
so
I just want to put a point on that.
relationship. If you say, well, I have a property, but I can't give you the address right now, like, the guy will not even trust you. Like, give me the address. If you're serious, you gotta have that feeling. If I give him the address, he's not gonna jump over me.
Yeah. Yes. That's a great point. I trust, and that goes to your point, trust your instincts.
Yes.
So if you're
Yeah.
feeling like you can't give them the address, then you should trust your instincts and not give them the address.
Correct.
And even wonder whether or not you want to work
Yeah,
with them.
right.
You can't get to that point
Sure.
that G2 is talking about.
And at the same time, I think there's some great conversations that we
Yeah.
can have that kind of skirt around the point, like, what's the address? Like, oh, I don't have it in front of me, but I know it's on this street.
Right.
You can still give them something.
Sure.
And see what kind of level of trust that you can mutually build and move forward, or not.
Yeah, I think that's the key, actually. There has to be mutual respect for each
Yeah.
other. And a lot of things I've seen the investors who are like experienced investors, between my 20 years of real estate, I haven't seen them cut corners and say, okay, I got the address and I'll see you later. It's almost never happened to
Yeah.
me, maybe. I've
Yeah.
been lucky, but especially the one who experienced
Yep.
developers or investors, and many of them will give you a blanket agreement, actually.
I
You tell
actually-
them up front. say,
I actually think this leads into a really good point. Like, what's your intention when you're out there in the real estate market as a salesperson? Is it somebody who's mostly working with the residential buyer who's purchasing homes and every once in a while wants to pick up an investor because, hey, we all want to make more money? Or is it kind of a route you want to take your career, a path you want to take your career? And I think that G2 has developed relationships over time. You work numerous times with
Yeah.
the same people because you
Yeah.
develop a trust. So if it's like part of your business model to develop these relationships,
It takes time.
you know, but the one-off person, they're hard to gauge, and you're
Yeah.
gonna go through the motions of trying to gauge
Yes,
their
sure.
reliability and also their assets. You know, we talked, Joe talked about money and also talked about the fact that they don't wanna meet you for a consultation.
Mhm.
There's, you know, part of the vetting process when we're working with any purchaser of real estate is like, are they legit? Right? Do they have the resources needed to purchase
Right.
this property? And,
Yeah.
and a lot of building trust and some time in with people and working with repeat people is it's gonna get easier as you make the relationships.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to share what I've done with some developers and land buyers, because like KB Home and those people that sign an
Mhm.
agreement ahead of time. So if you're serious in looking for land for them or working with them, what I've done over the years, I've signed a blanket agreement, say Alameda County or San Joaquin Valley, or put a county or a state, not state only, I'm supposed to qualify as a state, but give an area and give a blanket commission fee. So now you're not restricted, oh, do I have an agreement, do I not have an agreement, what are they gonna pay me, will they pay me or not pay me? So I've done that before where.
Yeah, I mean, that goes exactly what we were talking about
Yeah.
right before you showed
Have an
up,
agreement before.
around the
So
non-exclusive.
you're not worried about, you know,
Right.
damn,
that's-
what's gonna happen to me. if I
Yeah,
give
that's
you
what the
that.
non-exclusive buyer representation agreement is perfect for, is
So,
that.
Can, when working with an investor who has multiple agents that he's working with,
Mhm.
can he have signed multiple buyers?
Non-exclusive,
Non-exclusive.
absolutely.
Non-exclusive ones,
Yep.
okay.
So it's all gonna come down then to that proof of broker involvement with the notice, you know, in the scenario that you're bringing up. They're likely, actually, to have multiple, particularly in our changing climate where
Yeah.
everybody's gonna be using these,
Yeah.
is the investor is gonna be out there signing them with lots of
Many
people,
people.
right? And they're gonna have, so we're gonna have that extra burden of proving our involvement and documenting it and keeping tabs on what we showed them
Yeah.
and how much we've done for them and all of that.
We have a non-exclusive, by the way, they may have non-exclusive many agents, but what you have to do, once you engage on a property, you give them the address by email. That's the
Yeah.
legal document.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we've been through all
Oh, you
this
know
already,
already.
yes, yes.
I'm sorry.
I just
No,
will.
that's what we just said.
I'm sorry, I came there, I was trying to close a deal.
I will touch on something Gigi said that I think is for fairness, I want to agree with him. I said that there, you know, I was kind of implying that there's, that it's a different animal, you know, well, it is a different animal than your Bob and Cindy purchasing their own home because the investor's not going to be, you know, emotional about it and all the rest. And I was kind of implying that Bob and Cindy were better, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
actually, to G2's point, sometimes the non-emotional, business-minded
Yeah.
person who's making decisions about bottom line can be an easier person to work
Mm-hmm.
with. It's the building the trust part that's
Right,
the
takes
tough
time.
part. Once you're over that hurdle, then you can just look at numbers and
Yeah.
figure out what needs are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, where do we want to go from here?
Well, you said something that triggered me a little bit around consultations.
Yeah.
I was imagining myself as an investor, and
Mhm.
and I've invested before a handful of times, and walking into an open house and an agent saying, "Do you want to meet up at my office for a buyer consultation?"
Yep.
And like, oh no,
Yeah.
I absolutely don't.
Yep.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
So I guess all that to say is like, let's be careful about what expectation we're creating, as well as the words we use to bring people together.
It's a really good point. I will say that when I talk about consultations at an open house, I'm trying to close.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's another way to close that with an investor that's not scaring, because they do want to move quickly and they don't want to make relationships and they or monogamous relationships
yeah.
right off the bat, right? So.
And they don't want a formal presentation usually.
Mhm.
They want to know what you can do for them and how you work.
But I'm
and
going
why
to defend the concept behind consultations,
Oh, yeah.
though, because I do still
It's the
think
word.
that we need to. I know. I still do think we need to get here, though.
Yeah.
Like, so I was saying that after meeting with whoever we're meeting with for the first time, we need to have, in my mind, what is akin to a presentation ready for them, or a package, or a process, or a path forward for them. And maybe, you know, Joe's point is well taken, that it's not going to happen the way it would with probably this person. It would happen with consultation, where you're sitting down with them
Yeah,
the word
again, I wouldn't
domains.
use the word.
I
Let's
would,
get together and
I
talk
will.
about your goals.
But you don't have to use it with them, but that's what we call it in the industry, is a buyer consultation. So I would still say that you have to have you have to go prepare, and you have to have all the talking points ready, and you have to know the market that they're looking at. So, it's similar to, working with any other buyer. You've got a whole bunch of information from them now, and the way to show up next time is to show up. Like to know everything that's available in the parameters that they set for you. So you got to go back to your desk and get on the computer and start looking at properties.
So how do you find properties that might fit that buy box?
They're specifically or mostly looking for off-market.
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Not always, though. Like if you bring a good deal that achieves their goals, at the end they don't care. They think off market is better because it.
Well, let's do
in
it.
their mind
Though.
it means
Let's
cheaper.
do it because it's true that they're going to say that.
Yeah.
And the reality that all of us real estate agents know is that the concept out there of this big inventory of off-market opportunities that everybody believes exists doesn't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
There may be some off-market, but that person is coming up to her and saying, "Get me all of your off-markets." And come on, like how often do we hear that? And we're like, "There's not that many."
Well,
Opportunities.
I guess I have 2 points. It's true. We don't necessarily have that many, and there are a lot out there. There's a lot of private sales that still happen. It's just there's no central repository for it.
Right.
So it's not like there's some magical list of all the off markets.
That's the clarification
Yeah.
that was needed, actually. I've been in the position you're in where people expect you to have some one portal where you can find out about all the magical things in the world that every real estate agent themselves would have swiped up themselves
Yeah.
if they had this magical portal, and it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So that said, where do you find them? Where do you find these off market deals? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. You first. I'll do.
Social media.
Okay. Social media. Tell me more.
There's a lot of off-market you can go. Investors and agents list them on.
Yeah. Cool. I guess my one comment on that is there's a lot of noise. Sometimes just fake addresses.
That's true.
Yeah. So a lot of noise. Yeah.
I have a question about off-market properties.
Okay.
If I would knock on a door and find get a listing or have a discussion with the
Yeah.
seller, why would how am I, who am I fiduciary duties to my buyer or to the seller to make the most of the money for the seller?
You're
Or-
saying you signed a listing agreement, or you
No,
have a
I-
seller who says, I would be interested in selling for the right price.
Right.
Do you want me to address this?
Well, yes, and I have one more question first. Did you try to get a listing agreement signed, or is she like, no, I'll just bring me an offer? Have you had these conversations with sellers?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to sign a listing agreement, but if you brought me the right buyer.
Imagining it.
Okay.
What would I do in this
Wilson
situation?
just did, because we talked about it in the men's room, because that's the kind of things that Ben talked about. He was, I think you knocked the door, right?
No, I sent her a mailer and then she called me.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm grateful that Joe backed us up and asked if you had a listing agreement signed, or that if they wanted to sign a listing agreement. More usually. So Joe asked a question. He said, how do you get those off markets, right? And you answered it actually by asking your question.
Yeah.
One of the places you get an off market is you get out there and you pound the pavement, you make calls, you knock doors, et cetera.
Send flyers.
And send flyers. Another place I would just want to get in before we move too far away is here. You get off markets here. You talk to the agents in our office. You have conversations because you never know what somebody's got and knows about and coming down the line, et cetera. But now let's get back to that door that you knocked or that call that you made to that seller. Because you're working with an investor and you're looking for things. So we always have to worry about dual agency. We always have to worry about the our fiduciary duty, right? Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because there's tons of ways that we could get ourselves sued later if we handle it poorly. So when we're already representing that investor who's got a very specific need, and we're reaching out to just general members of the public who aren't represented themselves by someone else, there are a couple of different routes we can go. We can try to facilitate a listing agreement and act as formally as a dual agent. And put the deal together. It's really not my favorite path, but it's a path, right? And if we do that, then you're right, Anda, you have to look after the best interest of both sides. There's always going to be an issue when we're trying to act as a dual agent, when we know somebody's bottom line, and we know how far somebody else can go, and we're trying to navigate all that in our head and work out in everybody's best interest. So most real estate attorneys hate dual agency and prefer you not do it. When you're out there knocking doors, and it's a big deal, there's this kind of added layer, right? Because you already know the best interest and intentions of the investor that you're out there on behalf of. So there is a solution, and the solution is something called a seller non-agency. And you can make an arrangement with a third party, somebody that you meet in that fashion, and get them to sign a part form called the seller non-agency form. And the seller non-agency explicitly says, hey, you know, I'm going to put this deal together, and I'm going to work for you. I'm not going to work for you. I'm going to put this deal together. I'm going to work through this deal as my buyer's agent, and I'm going to be providing you with documents, forms, disclosures, things that you have a responsibility to provide back to me, filled out, and the rest. But and anything I give you or anything I tell you you need to give me, etc. You have anything I'm doing for you, I'm doing on behalf of my client, not of you. I'm just doing it to further their best interests. And at the same time, in that scenario, we also have to figure out who's paying us, where the money's coming from. Is it coming from a commission that we've already negotiated with that investor, or are we going to ask for some other compensation? We can still get compensation from that seller as long as we have that seller non-agency form signed, but we're going to have to work that out.
What I'm hearing is get crystal clear on who you represent and who you don't represent.
Absolutely, yeah. And in this scenario, because this is a scenario, in this hypothetical, I have a gigantic preference to arranging that seller non-agency and trying to facilitate a dual agency on the spot at somebody's door.
Yeah. It is interesting though when you, I have a recent example for a property in Berkeley that the seller reached out to me and had some questions and wanted to interview me as a listing agent potentially, but also wanted to know if I just had buyers. So I went and met her. She wasn't ready to sign a listing agreement because she was certain she wanted to interview 3 people and go back and ask them 18,000 more questions, that kind of seller. But she was also interested in seeing if I had a buyer for it. And so I reached out to one of my investors who I know is one of those people that is loyal to, you bring him the property, he works with you. So we went and saw the property together, and throughout this whole process, like, well, this is where we're at right now. I'm bringing a buyer who is my client on this property. So when I'm talking about this buyer, I'm not representing you in this capacity because that's what you decided how you wanted it to play out in this moment. Now, if that buyer doesn't want it and you want to come back and talk about a listing agreement, great, we can do that. So that's essentially what I'm getting at, is just openness about who I'm representing and whose best interest I have in mind.
So
And
you disclosed that at that moment when you brought the buyer?
When I called her, like, I got a buyer, you want me to come over? When can we do it?
Okay.
And here's how it works.
Got
Like,
it,
if I
okay.
bring this buyer is my client.
And there is another option that I kind of wasn't thinking of, which is that you could make the suggestion that you can refer that seller to one of your peers.
Yep.
And you can see if you can get them represented, which is really, from a risk management standpoint, a great idea, right? Because then later with a lawsuit, we can say they had their representation, right? But those are your options. Your options are the seller non-agency and being really clear the way that Joe was, that anything that I do, anything I tell you about, anything I do, any forms I give you, it's all in the best interest of this person here that I'm with.
Yeah.
Also, you want to make sure you're the form of communication between both of them. Sometimes you don't want them to communicate.
Absolutely, in every real estate transaction, if you can, but you can't always, but if you can, yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, the benefit of the savvy investor
Mhm.
compared to non-savvy, sometimes if you get him a deal, you'll be representing him when he buys, and then he'll list with you a month later.
Mhm.
So you can do both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And that's a great question to ask. I didn't ask that when we were role playing earlier, but that's a great one. It's like, when you are ready to sell this property, do you list with the person that helped you find it, or do you have a listing agent that you go back to every time? And they might be truthful and they might not be. Yeah.
And it brings me back to one of the propositions of lowering the commission for the sake of future business.
Mhm. Yep.
And how you address that.
Yeah.
And I did ask what is my guarantee that this is gonna happen if I start with the low commission for future promised business?
So Joe's got a
Yes.
great tip on this.
Yeah. When do you discount commission for a repeat person?
After.
At the repeat, yes, that's right. So, and usually they'll respect you when you say that. Like, my first deal, well, on the buy side, typically you're getting paid whatever the seller's paying. So that conversation usually goes pretty cleanly, at least until August 17th. That's when the NAR settlement stuff goes into effect now, by the way. But otherwise, yeah, it's usually a pretty easy conversation to say, on our first deal together, I'm going to charge a full commission, and then we can expect that on future deals it will be whatever it's going to be.
And don't get burnt on this, because I can tell you, real world, I get calls from agents who say, they promise that they do this, the listing with me, and that they do it for, the regular commission, but they're now asking for 1%. Well, yeah, they were haggling with you the whole time. What made you think that, so Joe's strategy is a great strategy. Let them pay for it the first time. Get paid.
Yep. And then when they do come back and say, all right, now it needs to be 1%, you get to decide if that's worth your time.
I think, with all respect, right, if you put your standard with your, whether it's a single family seller or a developer, everybody wants to know where you stand. That's the bottom line. If you say you're gonna give up half of your commission, guess what? I'm gonna ask this every time.
Yeah.
If you say, no, this is my business style, this is what I'm gonna do, I have 3 kids to feed, that's what you have to do.
That's what my kind of comment was referring to, too. The last time I talked to an agent about this, and I was like, surprise, surprise, right? Like, they already told you that they're looking for a deal, right? And you gotta have these
Set your
conversations.
standards, that's it, and stick to that, you'll see.
Yep.
you'll never
So,
change it.
so commission, so we do have a policy too in our office that we believe that we're all worth competitive commission out there, that we're putting in the time and the effort and the expertise, and we deserve a competitive commission. But there are exceptions to every rule, and there are moments where the dual transaction with an investor or something may make a lot of sense to negotiate commission-wise, but that has to happen in coordination with the office. We need to give an okay on it. So if you're planning to go out there and propose reduced commission on one side of a transaction, come to us so that you can pitch it to us and say, this is why, and then we can say, yeah, go for it.
And us is not me in this case. I can't talk about commissions.
Yeah.
In this office.
Come to me or Eric.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So that was a lot about wasting time in agency and protecting commissions. Where do we go from here? Did we want to return to non-savvy real quick?
I would like to finish up a little bit
Okay.
on where to find the opportunities.
Oh, yeah, that's where we
Because I
were.
think
We were on
that was
off-market opportunities.
Because I think that that's something I've struggled with when
Yeah.
I've had that investor come up to me and say, where are the secret houses, right? So I'm opening it up.
Yeah. So just to recap what we talked about, sending flyers, door knocking, for sale by owners potentially.
Conversations with your peers here.
Yep. Coming soons on the MLS are not technically on the market. You might be a member of the top agent network. Some stuff happens there. Networking, yeah.
Yeah, there are strict regulations with our MLSs, as members of our MLSs, when it comes to, you're probably all familiar with clear cooperation, this idea that, if something isn't on the market, we can't market it. If it's not on the MLS, we can't market it. The reality is that some of our business gets done through conversations. I would just say, respect the MLS rules, but also be cautious about what you're, be cautious about the recorded conversation. If you're with a friend or companion who's in real estate at a local bar or something like that, and they mention something that is of value to you, you know, if it happens, it happens, but it isn't a violation of clear cooperation to be sharing that, so I wouldn't memorialize it in writing anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, this might be a place where we get to duke it out at some point in the future. So
Okay.
let's come back to this conversation. Yeah, mano y mano.
Sounds good. Uh-oh.
All right. So where else are deals? Yeah, I mean, networking, frankly, I think is the most powerful
huge.
one. Yeah. And then what happens? Like, I got a corner lot in Richmond that's been burned up. Do you have a buyer for it? Like, often that's how these conversations go, right? So where do we go from there? What questions do you, I don't know, what do you need to ask? Do you have buyers? In this hypothetical,
Is this a seller or an investor asking, or?
when you're networking with agents.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
Wouldn't ARV be like one of the top things that investors look at when checking out a property?
Well, they want to know how much meat is on the bone.
Yeah.
So I worked with an investor for years before I finally fired him, and because he had me do a lot of his work for him. But essentially, the questions were: how much is it? How much work does it need in dollars? And what's it going to sell for? So essentially, he wants to know how much profit is on the table. Like, buddy, if I'm going to do this for you, I might as well do it myself. It's silly.
Are you
But that's-
saying you don't provide that?
I do from my professional real estate agent's perspective, not from, like, I don't know how much it costs to flip a house. Like, it depends what you're going to do to it.
And it's you know, anything in our industry, if you're dealing with an investor or a single family, you know, somebody moving into their home, committing yourself to numbers and to expectations. You know, we should always talk in ranges, and we should
Yeah.
talk in hypotheticals and make it clear. Let the buyer always has an obligation to do their own due diligence,
Yeah.
whether they're an investor or not.
And the ARV thing I think is a great point to touch on here. I have a client looking at a spectacular property in Berkeley Hills that was never finished. It started building in 1974 and they never completed it. So that kind of project. And so a lot of these questions come up, like, well, what's it worth? Like, well, it depends what you do to it. Like,
Right.
it could be a $4 million property.
It depends what happens to the market too.
Yeah,
I mean, there
yeah.
are too many variables to
Right.
commit yourself.
Right. Like, are you gonna actually finish out the custom windows and the
Mhm.
sound, the tetrahedral sound system that was gonna be installed? No joke. That's what they were doing.
I'm trying to figure out what that number would be. Tetrahedral. Is that a number? Is
It's
that
a
number
shape.
related? Oh, it's shape.
It's a
Okay.
three-dimensional triangle, so it's
Okay.
4 points.
Oh.
Yeah, I think. I
Okay.
just learned this today.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into that. And that's what I would always kick back to my investor. Like, well, you just saw the property. What are you going to do to it? Are you moving walls like we might have talked about doing? Or you know,
People
just...
always want us to answer in real estate questions that we can't possibly
Yeah.
answer because they can't because it's usually a question that they don't have an answer to, and you know, hypotheticals we can't answer when there are so many variables,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, so ranges come in handy. So if you're just lipstick on a pigging, it might be worth in this range, but if you're doing a full out gut renovation, it might be in this range.
From my experience, or the last two that I did, you know, you'd use language like that too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
The last kitchen I put in. Mhm.
So, I was doing a CMA as is, and I was doing a CMA ARV. That's not.
What was the first one? I'm sorry.
As is,
As is, yes.
and the CMA ARV.
Yep.
But that's not really advisable.
Well, no, it's helpful. It really is to
Not knowing.
to
But
be
just
able to
putting some-
show, right?
You need to have disclaimers for anything that you're putting in front of somebody like that. You
Yeah.
know, if we have to be able to give ranges and estimates and ideas of where things are at, et cetera, but we just need to be really careful about how we present those things.
Yeah, but the ARV one, so it is super helpful to show, like, this is what's selling in the neighborhood that's all beautiful and flipped and whatnot,
Mhm.
so you can see the range of values. Because it's still not gonna tell you, it's exactly this number.
That's right.
It's still a range. And that's helpful for your flipper clients to know too, especially when you include pictures around what kind of finishes the market's expecting, or you know how backyards are valued, or whatever it is in your submarket.
It's a great point, because also flippers aren't all created equal, right?
Yeah.
There's some people who do a stellar job and put the money in and and have a good design sense and all the rest. And value is all related to all of those things. So
Mhm.
you're gonna get a bunch of cheap Lowe's, fixtures to put in. So that's another reason why you just shouldn't commit to where it's gonna land.
Yeah.
Yep, yep, yep.
Mhm.
Did we finish that conversation?
I think so, yeah. So I have some boring forms, but I guess they're not really
Boring.
they're not the. All right, so you want to go over here to this guy?
Sure. Yeah, that's an educational conversation. That's
Okay. So where do you start, Joe?
Well, I tried with you, but you were very hard to work with, so I'm not sure I want to work with you.
Oh, that's good though. That was informative, right? That was informative.
Like, give me
Why?
something.
Well, I'll tell you why. Why I wouldn't work with me.
Uh-huh.
Because maybe I'm a waste of time.
Yeah.
Like maybe I'm that person that just really wants to use your time and has this kind of pipe dream. We need to kind of, motivation is everything in real estate.
Yeah.
So whether it's, Bob and Cindy again buying their single family home, like when's the kid starting school? When do you, when are you having that second baby? Like people's real lives come into play.
Mhm.
And the guy who's saying, I got some money from my uncle that
Mhm.
through, you have to evaluate whether or not they're. But say you had this, like, wow, this guy's loaded. He's got some serious family money. You've kind of got a sense of that, maybe through a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
And but they are pretty uneducated about the process. But you kind of want to keep them in your world.
I was trying to ask you those questions, and
Yep.
you're making it very hard. So
Okay.
let's try again.
Okay.
So tell me, what your goals are. So you just came into this $2 million
Yeah.
from an inheritance,
Right.
And I'm sure you want to take that legacy and continue it forward, and not just blow through it.
Yeah,
So
I would
that's what I'm
say
hearing.
I'll try to help you a little bit,
Okay,
but
thank
I
you.
still want to know what to do with this guy.
Sure.
So I'm not the most financially savvy guy in the
Okay.
world, and I do know that real estate investment, from what I read and what I hear, real estate is a safe place for me to park my money. So I just
Yeah.
want to know, can I do better than the stock market in real estate investment? Does it make sense for me to purchase in Oakland?
Right.
Does it make sense for me to purchase in Northern California?
Right. Okay.
What would you do, Joe? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, well, I've done a little bit of a lot of things, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy to share my experience and what I've learned. And but I think where to start though is to talk about some of the decision points that I think are important to make along the way.
Okay.
So as I think about wealth building, I just taught a class on this yesterday, so it's pretty fresh in my head. As I think about wealth building, I think it's vital to understand both where we are and where we want to go, so that we can actually chart a path to where we want to go. And so that's still my first question for you is, what is your big goal? Are you looking to grow this money for cash flow needs now, or for long-term
No,
appreciation?
it's just long-term
Okay.
investment. I just don't want to sit on it. I want to know, is my money better spent in a real estate investment
Versus what?
versus the stock market?
Versus the stock
Yeah.
market, okay. And have you explored other opportunities as well?
Not really, no.
Okay, but it sounds like you're pretty interested in learning more about real estate.
I am, yeah.
Great. Well, I'm in real estate, and I'm in it because I have a passion for it and believe it works. So we're in the right spot. So let's keep that conversation going. So I think next is the whole risk reward thing. You mentioned this for long-term appreciation more so than the short-term cash flow, and that's great for this market. We do tend to be in a place where you're not going to see large cash returns on a real estate investment because it's so desirable and we're in appreciating markets and interest rates are where they are. So that's great that you're realistic in that.
So let me ask
place.
you a question. What's
Yeah.
the least risky path? You mentioned risk, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty risk averse. So say I did want to dabble in
Mhm.
real estate investment.
Mhm.
Is there one path that you think is?
In short, no, but I have some more questions first.
Okay.
Are you looking for an investment that you can keep eyes on or be actively involved, or are you looking for more of a passive, just park money?
Absolutely passive.
Absolutely passive. Okay, so that's very different.
Mhm.
So you don't care if the property is down the street or in Albany, New York?
No, not at all.
Okay,
No.
cool. That's really helpful. So it sounds like so far where we're at is you want an appreciating market more so than a cash flow heavy market. You don't want to do any work, and you want to keep it on the passive side.
Yep.
Okay. And have you spoken with people who are landlords and gotten any tidbits from them?
I haven't really, I just know, like, my brother-in-law is a landlord, and just sounds like a big pain in the ass.
Yeah.
He's constantly, fixing things, that are breaking, he's constantly running around.
And you don't want to do that?
I don't wanna do any of that.
Okay, so if you buy something directly, you'll probably want a really strong property management team
Yes.
in place.
Yep.
So that's the first place the first thing that we need to make sure happens is that you have a strong team in place, so that you're not getting those calls about clogged toilets at 2 a.m.
And can I make a reasonable profit with that kind of cost, the cost of a property manager?
You can, yes. You mentioned that cash flow is less important and it's more about
Mhm.
the long-term growth. And so, yes, you're going to be paying for management expenses along the way, but because we're an appreciating market, over the long run, you're probably looking at being in a pretty good position as time goes on. If you keep the money parked here in the Bay Area, for example. So a strong team in place. So we'll need to set up some conversations with property managers so you can start get a sense for both what they charge and make sure you're finding partners that you trust, because you're essentially partnering up with them. Because if they're the wrong people, and I've been in these shoes, then you're back into answering the
Phone
ad.
and
Yeah.
So that's
Exactly.
what I was gonna ask you, what I do next. Like,
Yeah.
you're kind of giving me a little bit more context, like what active steps would we need
Yeah.
to take next?
Right. Well, I think it starts with narrowing down your market and types of properties that you're looking for. So some things to keep in mind on the risk versus reward spectrum. Some of the risks are things like rent control, tenant protections, high property taxes, maintenance costs. So there's a lot to keep in mind, both on the, I guess, jurisdictional level, like things that are outside of our immediate control, just by where we choose to invest, versus the property itself. So we'll need to figure out where your balance is. And I've got some materials that we can go through and talk in more detail.
We could hand out the rent control.
Sure.
So is Northern California like a renter? Is it a conducive market? Are most of these cities conducive to, is it a good thing to be a landlord?
Is it a good thing? That depends on your perspective and what your goals are. For being passive and not wanting to deal with headache is probably one of the harder places to be a landlord.
Oh, shoot.
In California.
In California
shoot.
specifically.
So is there, can I actually be a landlord in some other state?
Oh, sure. Yeah, where do you want to be a landlord?
I've always thought Alabama was pretty.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was getting at, and understanding the risks and the rewards so that you can find a market that makes sense for you and your goals.
Because the reality is the Bay Area is, filled with tenant protections,
Yeah.
right? So that's,
And
we're gonna
it's
look at-
not something like it's not a flat out don't invest here because of these things. It's a make sure that you're aware of them so you can make intelligent decisions about your money. And so it sounds like maybe you're leaning away from this area, but maybe not.
Yeah, I actually just, I want to make the most money I can possibly make with the fewest headaches, and I don't even want to hear from the property manager that we have a unruly tenant who won't get out. I don't want to run into any problems.
Okay.
So it sounds to me like I should invest out of California.
Sounds to me like you might want to invest out of California. So how do I get paid if I'm sending someone out of state? A referral, yeah. What were you gonna say?
No, I was just gonna say, going back to your question that he was asking, stock market versus real estate.
Yeah.
I was just in the rental program.
Yep.
And there was a section where they talked about stock market versus real estate, and I have had this conversation with two of the mates, that in stock market, let's say you put 200,000, your average return on S&P is probably 5 to 8%, and let's say when you take 8% on the higher side, and you're only making 8% on 200,000, versus you put 200,000 and buy $1 million property, your appreciation is not only 200,000, it's on $1 million. Where else are you going to get that leverage? You're putting only 200,000, but your appreciation is on $1 million. Over the next 5 years, if that $1 million property becomes 1.2, you're getting 100% return on $200,000 versus you get 8% return on $200,000 in S&P, that's probably $30,000, $40,000.
Yeah, so this is one of the magical things about real estate. So in my view, we should be harping on five tremendous powers of real estate. And Preet just mentioned one of my favorite, which is leverage. So I'm gonna go over his math in just a minute so that you can see it visually on how leverage accelerates your wealth building and your investments abilities. But the other four-ish, real quick, you probably know them, you probably talk about them. One is building equity, appreciation, cash flow, hopefully, and then tax benefits.
And another thing that I forgot to add, that
Yeah.
let's say you want to take the money out of the stock market, you pay taxes
I'll
on
send you some
that.
slides.
But when you take equity out, you're not paying any taxes on that. You can buy another piece of property.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about leverage real quick to drive that point home. So you have $200,000, and this is Preet's point exactly. If you have $200,000 and it grows by 5% a year, how much is that
5,000.
after 1 year? 5%.
Yeah.
10. It's 10. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
10,000. Where does it go? There. So you made $10,000 off of your $200,000 investment after 1 year. You take that same $200,000 as a 20% down payment for your piece of real estate. How much real estate can you buy?
$1 million.
$1 million. Yep. So if it appreciates by that same 5%, how much is that?
$50,000.
$50,000. Boop, 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 boop. Yep. So after 1 year, assuming all this is true, of course, you have $1,050,000 in assets versus $210,000 in assets. Same amount of growth, same amount of cash required. That's leverage. Is that cool?
Wait, what was that first example again?
This is like stock market growth.
Oh,
This is,
stock.
yeah, this is,
Okay.
you take money and it grows at some fixed rate. It could be a bank account right now, 5%.
Got it.
Yeah. But this is with leverage. Same $200,000 gets you $1 million property, which is $50,000 in growth.
When you're doing calculation for this $1 million property, there are costs, there are closing costs.
Oh,
there are
sure.
execution costs.
Yes, that's true. You can factor all that in.
Yeah.
If
You can factor that on, but
That's still
do the math over the
exponential,
next
yeah.
5 or 10 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm doing the math these days, my head is burning already
Yeah.
with the client.
the thing is, like, over time, it becomes an irrelevantly small amount of
Right,
money.
because that's one-time cost.
Yeah. And the compounding effect, when you start with $1 million and you're compounding at 5%, that's very different than starting at $200,000.
This is what my guy wanted to know, by the way.
Big-
Okay,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah.
cool.
The biggest one out of all the differences that leverage in real estate.
Yeah. Now, theoretically, you can leverage in the stock market too.
Correct, but
It's
that is
super
when you have a very
sad.
big number, that's
Yeah.
when you're allowed to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not with 100K.
And not with the interest rates, whatever they are, 7%. You'll be paying a lot more for a stock market.
And that's riskier.
Oh, yeah.
Not more risk.
Yes.
Either you will have a piece of paper at the end of the year, or you will have a house.
Prefer the house. So we were talking about, how to educate
That guy.
that guy,
Yep.
Eddie, how to educate Eddie. And this is part of how I do it too. Like, some of you have probably been to my house hacking class. But we talk about a lot of this stuff too, the leverage, the appreciation, the equity building, the tax savings. And that's ultimately why real estate. And then we talk about, is it in state, is it out of state, is it in our area or not, is it through a syndication versus an active piece of land that you buy directly. And that's kind of what we're getting at. Eddie is leading me to believe that he doesn't actually want to buy real estate. He actually wants to invest in like more of a syndication or group investment that
I was
is
going
truly
to ask you
hands-off.
about REITs and syndications and what are they?
Yeah, sure. So REIT is a real estate investment trust, which I frankly don't love because it tracks kind of between the real estate market and the stock market. So it fluctuates a lot and is heavily influenced by what's happening in stock market land. So it's not really, it doesn't feel to me like a real estate asset.
And then, but just as an overview, they're both ways for you to team up with your resources.
Oh, sure,
with
yeah,
your
I mean, there's-
asset.
yeah.
Just to kind of back up for people who don't
Uh-huh.
know that there's opportunities to be an investor in real estate that aren't you know, like an individual purchasing real estate.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a handful too. So REITs is more stock market exposure, but is a great potential tool. And the more we know about these things, the more we can educate our clients and win them over. And even if this has happened a lot to me, even if they don't buy a house because it's actually a different investment that's right for them, they're referring me their friends. Because I built the trust by showing them all their options, not just the ones that make me money. So REITs, DST for another, what do you call that acronym? Initialism, sorry. REIT is an acronym, DST is an initialism. Did you guys know that? Yeah, you knew that? Okay, cool. Do you guys want to know why? An acronym is something you can say, like NASA or REIT, whereas an initialism is initials, DST. Yeah.
Delaware something trust.
Delaware Statutory Trust.
Statutory Trust.
Yes, I guess it'd be an acronym if it were just, but it's not.
A vowel in there?
Yeah. So DST, Delaware Statutory Trust, it's a group investment structured through the state of Delaware in a really complicated trust manner. All you really need to know is that actually there's two really cool things about a DST. One is generally they're passive, so you're parking money and it grows. The cool thing is that it can be involved in a 1031 exchange, whereas all these other options that we're going to talk about cannot be. So if you have a seller who wants to get out of being a landlord, like maybe Eddie had a property and he's like, this isn't for me, a DST is a mechanism to help do that. Like, well, let's sell your property and 1031 exchange into a passive investment so you don't have to be a landlord anymore.
Without getting hit by the gains.
Yeah, without paying, with continuing to defer taxes. And then there's syndications. Those are simply group investments regulated by the SEC. We don't get paid commissions on them. Generally ever, not legally at least. They are generally limited in their liability exposure. So you're a limited partner, meaning you're parking your money, you get returns, but you're kind of off the hook for everything else, except for potential monetary loss if the investment goes bad. And then there's like grouping money together with friends that you'd probably do in more of an LLC type structure, which could be passive if you have a buddy who wants to. Let's go back to you, the unsavvy Eddie. Maybe you told me that you don't want to touch the property, but you do want to own it. Like it needs it. You don't want a DST or a syndication. You want to own something, and you don't want to talk to a property manager. So maybe we talk about like, are you looking to partner with any of your friends or buddies or colleagues or whatever? And like, oh, actually, I've been talking to this guy at work who loves numbers and stuff. Like, cool. Maybe he's on your team, and you're peeling off some of the equity and profits or whatever in exchange for him taking on the role of essentially an asset manager.
So let me ask you a question. In these three options, these three kind of group investment options, the reward for the people in this room, the real estate agents, is really about the relationships that we're building, that being a trusted advisor, and getting future opportunity for them, right?
Generally, you can get paid in a DST sometimes. There are brokerages there are investment firms that are licensed as real estate brokerages in the state of California, and if the deal is also in California, they can legally pay you a referral fee.
Okay. But this is where we're going to find ourselves more often.
Probably. And getting paid, yeah. Cool, where was that from? Oh, that was because Eddie wanted a passive investment, yes. And those are some passive investments.
So because of time, should we hit on, I'd like to kind of just at least bring up wholesalers for a second.
Yeah, we need to go here.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start with fancy contracts because that should be fast.
So yeah, there's a specific contract that we use when we're representing somebody who's buying an investment property, and that's the residential income property agreement rather than the residential purchase agreement, right? So we're using the RIPA, and it's really similar to the RPIA that you work with every day. It's set up in the grid form where you can, quickly assess terms of the transaction, but there are some added paragraphs that explain some of the obligations, particularly obligations of the seller to provide specific documents along with the sale. There's also the ability to attach a request or to provide, to start the conversation with something called a TOPA form. We have that with our RPA too. So it does a couple of things. The RIPA does something that our RPA does, where we can check a box and we have this tenant-occupied property addendum that gets sent over to the other side of the transaction, so that we can make sure everybody's on the same page about any, it's more than just tenants, any parties that intend to stay and occupy the property, because it can be somebody with a lease who is a tenant, or month to month that is a tenant, or it could be Cousin Joe. It's the point of this form that we kind of point to from our purchase agreements is to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that the buyer is getting, that the buyer is conveying how they expect the property to be delivered, whether that's vacant at the time of close of escrow, or with the tenant in place, with the leases that we've already received, et cetera. So the TOPA is one document that it kind of links from the RIPA and the RPA, but the RIPA itself includes paragraphs, I think it's 12 through 14 of the purchase agreement, that starts talking about the seller's obligation to provide you things like, income and loss statements and leases. There's a specific place where you would check the request for an estoppel. It's not, I'd surprise a lot of people, but it's not a default. You have to actually indicate that you want an estoppel.
Mm-hmm.
An estoppel is a document that's filled out by the tenant to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page about what landlord and tenant have agreed upon, because there are some things that happen in real estate, in landlord-tenant relationships that don't get documented on paper, conversations that happen, expectations that the two parties hold that were never made part of the lease, and then the estoppel gives the tenant an opportunity to express those agreed upon situations, where their parking spot is, what they some other verbal thing that happened.
Yeah, what they own, appliance-wise,
what they
who
own,
pays for
appliance-wise, et cetera.
utilities.
Yep.
And
Housekeeping.
Point out some critical item about estoppels, just to nail it home. Who fills out an estoppel certificate?
Oh, yeah, this is a critical point.
The person who was, oh my God, why is it? The one who's renting out the spot.
Yes, the
Sorry.
tenant or
The
occupant.
tenant, there you
Yes,
go.
exactly.
That's right.
Too often we will see a pre-typed in blue estoppel certificate. What does it mean if you see blue on the form?
It sounds like a car.
Yes, yes, that means the agent typed stuff in. And that, well, first of all, if you're the listing agent, I don't want to see the blue, please. And it's putting, I don't know, just putting everything at risk. So ask lots of questions if you're representing a buyer and you see a pre-typed estoppel certificate.
And if you're working for a landlord, reminding them that it's the responsibility of the tenant to fill out the estoppel, that is in their benefit.
Yeah.
That it's in the landlord's benefit, right? Because I can tell you that I get the phone calls after close of escrow about a situation where there was a tenant with some kind of expectation, and the landlord completely disagrees. If you get these estoppels filled out prior to close of escrow, you can work out, hopefully, any misunderstandings between the two parties and try to kind of figure it out before it's way too late. So let's hear what they think their agreement is.
The only subpoena I've ever received was related to this very thing. My seller filled out an estoppel certificate instead of the tenants, and then the tenants claimed that they were wrong, essentially. And so, yeah. I guess
Well, we have an issue going right now that's actually probably going to be, is leading towards being a pretty big dispute that's related to our dual agency, where our listing agent wasn't able to get an estoppel that was asked for in the purchase agreement until really the 11th hour, provided it in the 11th hour. The buyer's agent wasn't quick in getting it over to the buyer becomes the landlord is then, is then reading, it's in another office, but the landlord is then, there's a real significant difference of opinion about where some parking is that will affect the building of an ADU that the landlord had expected and figured into their calculations, and it's becoming a way bigger deal because we didn't get it taken care of. So, get those estoppel signed and get them taken care of and presented to all parties. Yes.
Okay, sound important enough? Can we move on?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
No, it's really
next
important.
one, and then I'll
Let's
just
talk about
move
a
to the
lot.
wholesalers.
Wait,
real
quick question.
Okay.
On what types of properties is the RIPA used? The RIPA?
Yeah, so when, best practice is whenever you're purchasing an investment property that you use the RIPA. So the residential one, our regular purchase agreement is a residential 1-to-4 agreement. They can be used for properties that are more than one unit, but the language that's included in the RIPA, it helps to get us some clarification around tenant issues, and so the RIPA is the preference.
So any investment property, or do you mean any property that is currently or will be tenant occupied?
Yes, to the first one. Any investment property is best practice. To
Even
use
if I'm
the
flipping it?
RIPA, yes.
Oh, okay.
And second
Guess so.
is, yes, is best practice.
Yeah, okay.
The reality is that either can be used to facilitate the purchase of a property. That's
Yeah.
just the reality. So when there's an overlap, we just deal with it. But best practice would be use the RIPA when you're doing an investment property, because it deals with so much language about things that affect investors, because it's not just tenant related stuff, but things like income and expenses and all the rest. And just making sure that there's real clarity around that is preferable.
What if I'm buying a house for me, I'm gonna move in, but
Yeah.
it is currently tenant occupied?
If you're going to buy a house, yeah, that would be an RPA probably. RPA.
RPA, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because you're gonna move in.
Yep,
Yeah.
but there will be a tenant at closing,
There will be a tenant that's vacating at closing.
not vacating.
Oh,
I have to
that's
work on
keeping
getting
on
them out. Yeah.
the property. It's one of these. But because it's the actual reality with the RIPA and the RPA is that they are interchangeable. I would probably use the RIPA.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Okay. That's been my, we've never talked about this,
Mhm.
but my rule of thumb has always been, if there's a tenant involved at all,
Yeah.
RIPA. Because it has extra tenant
Yeah,
clauses.
you're gonna serve the same purpose of closing the escrow, but do you want
Yep.
the extra protections of those extra paragraphs that make clear to
Yes.
all parties? Yes.
Yes, we do.
And so,
Yeah.
So that's the RIPA, so there's a special form that you're using, and it does, like I say, they both link to the TOPA, but there's more conversation about things like the estoppel and all the rest, so it's a great form and you should be using it, but I wanna make sure before.
I know, but what about the crappy contract that my investor sends me that he wants me to submit?
Oh, I see. I didn't even know why you wrote fancy contracts, because that was so
That's what I
long,
meant.
that was so long ago. Or the time that we dealt with this, that it was a big deal was like a year ago.
So let me set the stage and you can
Okay.
answer it. So let's see, I have a investor that I met at a meetup or something, and I sent him a property that he likes. He sends me an email with an attachment that's like, I want to submit an offer, here's the offer I would like to submit, or here's the contract I would like to use. It's a 2-page document that says, I'm gonna buy whatever property, here's how much, here's the basic terms, that's it. So, what do I do with that?
Do you want me to answer?
I would love for you to answer,
Or
yes.
we're pitching it out there. So we're members of a professional association that employs lawyers that make up contracts for us with the really deliberate intention to protect both the buyer and the seller. But so it's in the best the client. The document is actually supposed to be a neutral document. It's supposed to start from a neutral place. Our California purchase agreements, and to protect us. The third-party contract that's produced by Joe Schmo is not something that we have any expertise in, and we have to convey that to our client right away. That this isn't that as a professional licensed real estate agent in the state of California, I am a member of this association, and my personal experience and expertise is with this other kind of contract, and I can't evaluate. I'm not a lawyer, and I can't evaluate the content of this document. And you say, let's put it down. Let's talk about what you're looking to accomplish, and we'll put it down on a residential purchase agreement. there's another element to this, which is what we ran into when these were circulating, is that we had an agent who was the listing agent for a property, and they, in two occasions, two different agents received this kind of Word document that laid out terms. And everybody remembers from their real estate classes, I hope, that we have an obligation to present all offers received, right? We can't just, decide ourselves to hold back an offer received. So then it gets a little complicated. Is this an actual offer? This thing that's non-standard, that wasn't made by an attorney, et cetera? The answer is probably, actually. But is it something that we're qualified to evaluate? No. So we have to actually tell our client that we received this non-standard document, talk to them about all of the reasons why we can't advise on it, and that they should speak to an attorney about it, and pitch maybe the idea of asking that person to send us back something on a residential purchase agreement.
Speak to an attorney if they have any interest in moving forward.
Yeah, right.
So often they're throwaways, but sometimes they're not.
When you wrote fancy contracts, I was like, the RIPA is pretty cool, but it's not that fancy. It's not that crazy. He means creative. These creative things that aren't on our forms are not in our, it's not in our lane, and we need to steer as clear away from it as possible.
Yeah, and the reality is, like, they are probably binding, but we can't advise. Like,
at all.
Real estate can be sold on a napkin. It needs to be in writing. And what else needs to happen? It's like, it needs to be in writing, and both parties need to agree, and you're done. There needs to be consideration.
Yeah. So there needs to be money that passes. But but the reality with I just want to press upon that other point too, that the car attorney, the whole point of the RPA is that it's supposed to establish itself with a kind of neutral position to begin with, right? And then we write in terms. So the fancy contract, as Joe puts it, is obviously not a neutral document. It's produced by one party to favor them, right? So if we receive it, we should be really wary of it. I just want to address, because we are over, the prevalence of wholesalers and in our communities, and this is probably one of the places where Joe and I, if we needed to, could get like this about it or whatever, because Joe is a realist who really wants everybody to succeed in real estate and make lots of money, and my job is to be afraid. And wholesalers are a big old mess generally.
What is a wholesaler? Let's start there though. Real quick.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
Yeah, they sell to investors. Wholesalers are usually people out there trying to make a buck in real estate, and they're gonna buy properties and sell them in an unconventional way and get you in a lot of trouble.
Or they're putting a property under contract and selling the contract itself.
So I had written down the word assignment. There's this concept in real estate, which probably maybe some of you know, maybe you don't, where you can assign over the obligations of one party to another party. So when we have a buyer of real estate on a purchase agreement, we can that buyer's obligations can be assigned over to another party. Wholesalers will sometimes come to the table. Who was the one from Southern California that was writing offers like mad? Maybe I shouldn't use names anyway, but I have the name. But there are these wholesalers that are just trying to jump in and usually lowball and vulnerable properties where there haven't been a lot of offers, or for whatever reason, just try to collect the contract. Actually, they're just trying to. That's their end game. Is
tie up the property.
Is tie up the property and get a contract so that they can do this thing, assign it over. We see assignments all the time. We see assignments when, like, if I am on a purchase agreement and the lender says that Eddie, your credit's bad, but your spouse is really good. Your spouse needs to be on this contract. I can assign it over to both of us. There are assignments where I may have an LLC and I've signed a purchase agreement, but I decide that I actually want my LLC to buy it and not me. That's an assignment. But there are these assignments where wholesalers are adding they're replacing the buyer completely. So they'll put their name, John Doe, down on the contract, or somebody's holding that spot.
Yeah, and it goes like this. Like, I've got this property under contract that I thought about buying myself, but it's gonna be a great deal. So the contract price is $400,000, and you just slip me like 20 grand on the side, and I'll assign it over to you. ARV is $700,000. It fits in your buy box. What do you think?
Good. Let me take a look at it.
Okay. And so where's the big challenges
So,
with that
so
relationship?
just to touch on there, when you're doing assignments, you can do an assignment where you're asking for consideration or when you're not asking for consideration. Consideration being money. So just to like put, in a lot of these more traditional scenarios, you're just assigning it over to another party that's affiliated with you or whatever. But in this situation with wholesalers that Joe just described, somebody's making a profit off of the assignment. Like the assignment is the business deal for them. The problems occur because in every real estate transaction, when we commit to something binding in an agreement, there's certain performance that everybody is committing to throughout. And when we are representing sellers of real estate, part of our job is to help vet the potential purchasers who are coming along to make sure that they're going to follow through and perform throughout. So when I receive an offer on behalf of a seller and I'm maybe seeking multiple offers on behalf of a seller and I'm helping my client evaluate them, I'm evaluating a particular individual or the signer of that document and their ability to perform. When we get into these situations where a wholesaler signs over the property, they have the same responsibilities. There's clear language in assignments that person has the same responsibilities to fulfill all the future obligations that are left performance-wise. And they also are required to okay any documents that have already been viewed by buyer number one, as long as it was previous, and they have an obligation to provide the same kind of lender letter, the same ability to purchase and the like. But I've seen enough of these go south where it's assigned over to just somebody who we haven't had an opportunity to vet, and then they're kind of weird and shady and they prolong escrows and the rest. So there's this kind of like random variable that's added in some of these assignments. So.
And there's also the messiness of commissions. Like in this example between Preet and I had an agent that wrote my offer. He's got an agent that he works with. Who gets paid?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have an answer, and we don't need to get into that because that's very variable based on the situation and ultimately how hard you want to fight. But the point is, like, it's complicated, messy stuff, and it's often made messy by the person that I was playing in this situation.
And as I was saying, like when earlier when G2 is kind of defending that there are solid investors out there who aren't sleazy. So wholesalers, in my experience at least, are usually people who have, they have just one interest in mind, and that's to, sell over that or, get some consideration for the assignment. They don't care about the outcome for everybody else, and I'm just really wary of them, personally.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
I have an encounter with a wholesaler and the deal didn't go through because title problems. So the title issues might be with wholesalers because they are buying maybe foreclosure or close to foreclosure, or I don't know what situation.
So
so that's separate from the wholesale. The wholesaler may or may not have been involved, and you would still have problems.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's a good thing to point out for any investment deal is look at the title report and understand how to get.
But I can do one that kind of works out where it was the problem because of the wholesaler, which is that, and the vetting process is that I had one recently, or a call from an agent or problem from agents where an assignment was made from a wholesaler, and the assignee had a business partner that was supposed to, and had a contract outside of our contract with that business partner, that they were supposed to be getting all the leads from this wholesaler and purchasing as part of their LLC with their business partner, and then they purchased without their business partner, and then the business partner got in touch with title and everybody else and said that they were going to sue because they had that outside agreement. And how enforceable is that? Who knows? But I know the title didn't want to touch it anymore, right? They wanted away. So this concept of not being able to vet the people, it's our fiduciary as a listing agent to vet the people coming to the table for our seller. And this is where we wind up in this kind of who knows situation when these wholesalers are signing it over.
Yeah. So when someone calls and says, "I want to write an offer on this property," like how do you determine if they're actually serious about keeping the property or if they're just going to dump the contract and create a mess for you? Any thoughts?
I don't know, Joe, how?
Well, sometimes it's not that easy, but
Yeah,
it's a
having
fact-finding mission.
conversations.
What do you plan
Yeah.
on doing with the property? And if that's something vague, like, this is what I've heard before. It's like, oh, you know, I've got some partners that I might bring into the deal, and maybe we'll probably end up flipping it. Like, that's not very clear. And serious investors have a plan. They're running a business. A wholesaler is getting as much under contract as possible to sell as much as possible, most of which they end up having to cancel because they don't perform. Yeah.
So when does the wholesaler's job end? Like when they hand over the contract or till the other party like closes? I think that's where it
It's
gets
an
iffy,
interesting
right?
question, and I will tell you that there's a little short answer and a long answer. The short answer. The reality is that they often think, or people think, that they got their consideration for the assignment and that they're off the hook. But there's still an obligation for buyer number two, the person they assign it to perform and close escrow, and they can be looped into the liability chain if there's a performance issue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it gets ugly, right? Where you say, well, that's one of the ways it can get messy.
Mm-hmm. Some wholesalers, though, will close the deal and then sell it. And that's a clean way to do it.
Way more preferable.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's a question to ask. Like, yeah.
In response to your, what you were talking about just a minute ago, a lot of times you'll see offers that will come in from John Smith or Assanine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's that right there, that's a red flag.
Yep.
And I immediately say, all right, tell me about the Assanine.
Yep.
Who do you have in mind, and why aren't they making the offer themselves? And I push them, and usually I tell my sellers, like, I don't, the offeror, they're not really providing me much, and I don't know that we even want to deal with them. I said, if they've got someone in mind, then I tell them, my seller will entertain an offer from the Assanine, but we're not taking your offer the way it's written.
Yeah.
So the point that Steve makes is a really good one. Sometimes you'll see it on the purchase agreement, but the problem is you don't have to see it on the purchase agreement because they're assignable, and a reasonable assignment can be made within 17 days according to the boilerplate of the thing. But to Steve's point, you do see it quite often. So there are a lot of times where you can get ahead of it and say,
there is seller consent. There is
Right.
there is seller consent to the assignment in the assignment.
Yes, yeah. I will tell you from a lot of personal experience that a wholesaler will often do an assignment marking the box saying that they're not getting paid, knowing that they're getting paid on the side. And that's just not a deal that we want to be a part of.
wow, that's good. I like that. Period, exclamation point. It's not, don't want to be a part of it. Yep. Okay.
Are we good? Should we
I
wrap
think
this
we're
up?
good. I think that we
I'll
covered
show
a
you
lot.
One other assignment example, and this was years ago, probably 10 years ago at least. There was a builder in Phoenix building new condominiums in downtown Phoenix, and they started out at about, I think they started at about $70,000, and everybody just started, and every price release they kept going up $10,000. And so people just started snapping up these condos and then turning around and assigning them to someone else for $10,000-$20,000, and they just kept doing it.
Oh, man.
And the builder didn't realize it for quite a while. And this went on for 3, 4, 5 months. Then finally the builder got wind of what was going on and then put a no assignment clause in the contracts. But there were people, we had a couple agents in our office that they were knocking down 20 grand a deal like every month practically. And everyone that had money was involved in it.
Interesting.
Just think about that from representing a seller point of view, right? When your seller finds out that there's all this extra money being made on their property on the outside, it's another reason.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's a good place to say we're done, and say thank you very much. I hope we got some good takeaways.
I just want to say one real quick thing, which is that Joe and I were talking about this before this class, and we were like, there's so much to cover, right? And there's so many variables in it. So this was a great discussion. But the reality is, I think one of the things we wanted to impress upon you is that it can get really complicated working with real estate investors, right? And there's a lot of things to be thoughtful about. And so talk to us too, like call me and we'll brainstorm if you're having a specific issue with an investor you know, speak to some of your trusted mentors and people that you trust in this office.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Joe? Question.
Yes.
You mentioned, out of the real estate, this one, you
Yeah.
said, of course, the tax benefit.
Yes.
Average.
I was writing down those things.
I missed one of them.
Yeah.
I forgot what was it.
Every other.
Okay, appreciation.
Yeah.
And, acronym, what was that?
That's an initialism.
Initialism.
That was probably the least important thing that we
Yeah.
said.
You said, you don't like, REITs.
I generally don't do REITs.
What was the
yeah.
reason?
Because they track the stock